Canary Street Press and HarperAudio present Scot and Bothered by Alexandra Kiley. Performed by Angus King and Savannah Davies.
Chapter 1. Now. Brooke Sinclair had always dreamed of seeing her words in print. Only, she thought, as she picked up the book at the sign-in table, she hadn't pictured her client's name on the cover, her own name buried inside a legally binding gag order. She ran her thumb over the raised text of the author's name, and the letters singed her finger like they were cursed. Maybe that's why they called it ghostwriting. Better hurry in. Susie's about to start the discussion. Brooke gave the check-in woman a tight smile and skirted the D-shaped atrium of McEwen Hall at the University of Edinburgh. Her almost alma mater. The front of the auditorium might have been a cathedral with a 2-story gilded organ filling the space, capped off by a bridge of windows under a carved arch. The soaring dome rivaled St. Peter's Basilica, and 3 stories of balconies ringed the room. It felt like the type of place that would host a Shakespeare play instead of a signing for a book Brooke had written but could never mention. The words that used to ricochet through her as she'd walked these prestigious halls were best-selling author and creative writing fellow. But as she made her way to the back of the gathering, try hard clanged around in Brooke's mind. She'd once thought she'd graduate in this room, even looked forward to sitting on an uncomfortable wooden chair so long as she was clad in a cap and gown. Surely 7 years was enough time for the resentment to fade. But as she stared up at the blue-tinged rose window at the center of the ceiling, surrounded by ornately carved wooden embellishments and murals mimicking the Italian classics, that bitterness in her chest prickled as strongly as ever. Usually, she swelled with pride when she attended her authors' events. She loved celebrating their stories and achievements from the audience. But there was something about being back on campus that prevented her from blocking out that voice that said these jobs were a far cry from what she'd set out to do. Like she'd left all her old dreams behind in these hallowed halls, and they'd sucker-punched her when she'd walked in the door. It wasn't as if she hadn't attempted to write her own stories in the intervening years, but Brooke froze up, choked, wrote such absolute garbage, she was surprised her computer didn't self-destruct in an indignant display of disgust. She'd been a shooting star who'd flamed out spectacularly. All that potential people had talked about her whole life, maybe it had never existed in the first place. It was easier to slip into someone else's story, someone else's voice, than to admit she'd lost her own. Brooke made her way down the aisle, discreetly glancing around for her editor, Charlotte. Brooke only had enough bravado to make it through the signing, not to have one single conversation with anyone she'd known back then. She'd overdone it with the makeup this morning, as if a heavy hand with a shimmering eyeshadow could disguise her crumbled confidence. It didn't. And Brooke was reminded of the sad fact every time she had to raise her eyebrows to unstick the crease of her eyelids. By the time Brooke spotted Charlotte in the second row, her flight reflex was in full-on hummingbird mode under her sternum, or maybe a mockingbird. Morning dove? Regardless, it was taking up her entire chest cavity and not leaving any space for her lungs. She clenched her hands to get some blood back into them. Charlotte stood and waved to Brooke, the bangles on her wrist glinting in the low light. She was chic, as always. Her black hair styled in a wavy pixie with an undercut, wearing gold hoop earrings and an indigo floral midi dress. Brooke moved down the row and slipped into the empty seat next to Charlotte, who ran a hand lovingly over the book Brooke held. "It turned out so nice, didn't it?" she asked in her soothing Scottish accent. "It's stunning." And it was. The colors were vibrant, the title was perfect. It was a cover anyone would be proud of.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?